19-year-old Marcus Brennan stepped into the Jefferson County courtroom with an unsettling confidence. His lips curved into a perpetual half-smile as he surveyed the packed gallery. Among them sat the devastated family of Rachel Martinez, the woman whose life he had callously stolen. He moved through the proceedings with the casual ease of someone attending a minor appointment, utterly convinced that his youth and charm would carry him through unscathed. What he failed to anticipate was that the most crushing testimony would emerge not from forensic experts or veteran detectives, but from someone who had witnessed his descent into darkness firsthand. His older sister, who had spent years trying to save him from himself. The autumn evening of November 3rd settled over the quiet streets of Riverside, California, with a comfortable warmth that belied the approaching winter. Porch lights flickered on one by one along Sycamore Avenue, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. Inside her modest bungalow at the corner of the street, 47-year-old Rachel Martinez was wrapping up her evening routine. The scent of lavender from her garden drifted through the open windows as she moved through her home with the practiced ease of someone who had lived there for over a decade. Rachel was a woman who had devoted her life to community service, spending 15 years as a social worker, helping troubled families navigate their darkest moments. Her neighbors knew her as the woman who organized block parties, who checked on elderly residents during heat waves, and who kept a bowl of candy on her porch year-round for the neighborhood children. She had touched countless lives with her quiet acts of kindness, never seeking recognition or reward. On this particular evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the streetlights hummed to life, she had no inkling that her own story was about to end in the most brutal and senseless way imaginable. The street was alive with the typical sounds of suburban tranquility, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of air conditioning units, the occasional car passing by. It was a neighborhood where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked, where children played outside until dark, where the greatest concern was usually a package stolen from a porch. That illusion of safety was about to be violently torn away, revealing the thin veneer that separated peaceful existence from inexplicable horror. The first indication that something was wrong came at 9:23 p.m., when a frantic call to 911 was placed from a blocked number. The dispatcher heard heavy breathing, a muffled scream, and then silence as the line went dead. The call was traced to the vicinity of Sycamore Avenue, and 2 patrol units were immediately dispatched to investigate. Officers Daniels and Park arrived at 9:31 p.m., scanning the quiet street for any signs of disturbance. It was Officer Park who noticed the front door of the Martinez residence standing slightly ajar, a warm glow emanating from inside. The welcome mat sat perfectly straight, and potted plants lined the porch with orderly precision. Everything appeared normal, except for that door, hanging open like an invitation into nightmare. The officers announced themselves and entered cautiously, their training telling them that something was very wrong even before they saw the evidence. The living room told a story of sudden violence. Furniture had been overturned, a lamp lay shattered on the hardwood floor, and there were clear signs of a struggle. Rachel Martinez lay near the entrance to her kitchen, her body positioned in a way that suggested she had been trying to reach the phone. The scene was one of such profound violence that it seemed impossible that it had occurred in this peaceful home, on this quiet street, in this safe neighborhood. The initial assessment revealed no signs of forced entry from the front of the house, though a back window had been pried open. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. Rachel's purse sat untouched on the entry table, her laptop remained on the coffee table, and jewelry was visible in her bedroom. This was not a robbery gone wrong, or a crime of passion. It was something far more disturbing, an act of pure, unmotivated violence that would leave the entire community searching for answers that might never come. The task of notifying Rachel's family fell to Detective Sarah Chen, a 20-year veteran of the Riverside Police Department who had delivered too many of these terrible messages over her career. Rachel's younger brother, Miguel Martinez, received the call at 11:15 p.m. Detective Chen's voice was professional but gentle as she asked him to come to the station, refusing to give details over the phone. Miguel knew immediately that something catastrophic had happened. Police don't make these calls for minor emergencies. The drive to the station was one of the longest journeys of Miguel's life. His mind raced through every possibility, each scenario more terrible than the last, hoping desperately that there had been some mistake, some mix-up that would be cleared up upon arrival. But Detective Chen's expression when she met him in the lobby told him everything he feared was true. She led him to a private room where she explained, as gently as the brutal facts would allow, that her sister had been murdered in her own home. Miguel's world fractured in that instant. Rachel had been more than his sister. She had been his rock, his confidant, the person who had helped raise him after their parents passed away. She was the one who called every Sunday, who never forgot a birthday, who had been there for every important moment of his life. The idea that she was gone, stolen by an act of senseless violence, seemed impossible to process. Detective Chen gave him time to absorb the shock, offering water and tissues as he struggled to comprehend a reality that refused to make sense. As the night wore on, other family members arrived at the station. Rachel's teenage daughter from a previous marriage, her elderly aunt, her closest friends. Each went through the same terrible journey from disbelief to devastation. Detective Chen explained that the investigation was in its earliest stages, that they had no suspects yet, but that every available resource was being dedicated to finding whoever was responsible. She asked them about Rachel's life, her routines, whether she had mentioned any concerns about her safety. But Rachel had no enemies. She was a woman who had devoted her life to helping others, who had no conflicts beyond the occasional professional disagreement with a client's case plan. The family gathered in the waiting area of the police station, united in their grief and confusion. They held each other and cried, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become incomprehensible. Rachel's daughter, Sophia, kept asking why. Why would anyone hurt her mother? Why would someone target a woman who had never harmed anyone? But there were no answers, only the terrible silence of a question that defied logic. As the news of the murder spread through Riverside, the community reacted with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Rachel Martinez had been a fixture in the neighborhood for years, known not just by name, but as a friend, a helper, a presence that made the community better. Her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a violation of everything the residents believed about their safe, close-knit neighborhood. Within hours, a makeshift memorial began to grow on Rachel's lawn. Neighbors left flowers, candles, and handwritten notes expressing their shock and sorrow. The local news picked up the story, and it quickly became a focal point of community concern. How could this happen here? Who would do such a thing? Parents kept their children inside, residents checked and rechecked their locks, and a palpable fear settled over Sycamore Avenue. Detective Chen led the investigation with methodical precision, assembling a team of forensic specialists and experienced investigators. The crime scene was photographed and documented from every angle. Evidence was carefully collected: fingerprints, DNA samples, fiber evidence, anything that might provide a lead. The medical examiner's preliminary report indicated that Rachel Martinez had died from blunt force trauma combined with multiple stab wounds, suggesting an attack that was both frenzied and sustained. The forensic team worked through the night, processing every inch of the house. They found the point of entry, the back window where the screen had been cut and the latch forced. They discovered footprints in the flower bed beneath the window, size 11 sneakers with a distinctive tread pattern. Inside, they found signs that the attacker had spent time in the house, rifling through drawers not to steal, but seemingly out of curiosity. It painted a disturbing picture of someone who had broken in not for material gain, but for some darker purpose. The breakthrough came on the third day of the investigation. A neighbor, 2 houses down, had recently installed a home security system with cameras covering their driveway and part of the street. When Detective Chen reviewed the footage, she found something significant. At approximately 9:05 p.m. on the night of the murder, a young man was captured walking casually down Sycamore Avenue. He wore dark clothing and a baseball cap pulled low, but his gait was unhurried, almost leisurely. At 9:47 p.m., the same figure appeared again, walking in the opposite direction, this time moving slightly faster, but still without the panic one would expect from someone fleeing.
Before the trial could proceed, there was a critical legal hurdle to clear, determining whether Marcus would be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. Though he was 19 at the time of the arrest, the crime had occurred just 3 weeks after his 19th birthday, and California law required a hearing to determine the appropriate court for prosecution. The transfer hearing took place before Judge Rebecca Thompson, a respected jurist known for her careful consideration of the law and her concern for juvenile justice reform. The courtroom was packed with media, community members, and Rachel Martinez's grieving family. Marcus sat at the defense table, wearing civilian clothes provided by his attorney, his expression one of barely concealed impatience. James Patterson opened the hearing by presenting the evidence of the crime, not the full case, but enough to demonstrate its brutal nature. He showed crime scene photographs, played excerpts from Marcus's confession, and presented testimony from the medical examiner about the severity of Rachel's injuries. He argued that the sophistication and brutality of the crime, combined with Marcus's complete lack of remorse, demonstrated that he was beyond the rehabilitative scope of the juvenile justice system. Your Honor, Patterson concluded, this was not a momentary lapse in judgment by an immature mind. This was a calculated, brutal murder committed by someone who has shown, both before and after the crime, a fundamental inability to empathize with other human beings. The defendant may be chronologically young, but his actions and his psychological profile indicate someone who poses a continuing danger to society and who requires the full accountability of the adult criminal justice system. Morrison countered by presenting expert testimony from Dr. Robert Chen, a forensic psychologist specializing in adolescent development. Dr. Chen testified about the ongoing development of the prefrontal cortex in young adults, explaining that impulse control and consequential thinking continued to develop into the mid-20s. He argued that Marcus's crime, while horrific, could be understood in the context of an underdeveloped brain combined with significant childhood trauma. Morrison also presented testimony about Marcus's difficult upbringing, his mother's abandonment, his father's emotional absence, the lack of consistent mental health support despite multiple warning signs. She argued that Marcus had essentially been failed by every system meant to help troubled youth, and that placing him in the adult criminal justice system would be giving up on someone who might still be capable of rehabilitation. Throughout the hearing, Marcus's behavior undermined his own defense. He slouched in his chair, occasionally smirking at testimony, and showed visible impatience with the proceedings. When Dr. Chen testified about his psychological vulnerabilities, Marcus rolled his eyes. When Morrison presented evidence of his difficult childhood, he shook his head dismissively. His body language communicated a clear message. He didn't see himself as a victim, and he certainly didn't want anyone else to see him that way. After 2 days of testimony, Judge Thompson delivered her ruling. She acknowledged the defense's arguments about brain development and childhood trauma, noting that these were important considerations in juvenile justice. However, she found that the extreme brutality of the crime, the clear evidence of premeditation, and most significantly, the defendant's complete lack of remorse and his disturbing behavior during the proceedings, warranted trial in adult court. The juvenile justice system, Judge Thompson stated, is designed to rehabilitate young offenders who have the capacity to understand their wrongdoing and to change their behavior. Based on everything I have observed and the evidence presented, I do not believe the defendant has demonstrated that capacity. His behavior in this courtroom, his statements to police, and the nature of his crime all suggest someone who does not merely need guidance and rehabilitation, but who requires the accountability and restrictions that only the adult criminal justice system can provide. The ruling was a significant victory for the prosecution and a devastating blow to the defense. Marcus would be tried as an adult, facing the possibility of life in prison. As the judge finished speaking, Marcus's reaction was telling. A brief flash of anger crossed his face, quickly replaced by his usual mask of indifference. He had finally realized that this wasn't a game he could simply walk away from. With the transfer hearing decided, both sides began preparing in earnest for the trial. James Patterson and his team refined their strategy, determining the order of witnesses and the specific evidence they would present. Their approach would be straightforward. Present the overwhelming physical evidence, play Marcus's confession, and let the jury see for themselves his disturbing behavior. Patterson also worked with the Martinez family on their victim impact statements, though those would come after the verdict. Miguel Martinez proved to be a powerful advocate for his sister's memory, and Patterson knew his testimony about Rachel's life and legacy would provide crucial context for the jury. For Catherine Morrison, trial preparation was an exercise in damage control. She knew conviction was virtually certain, so her focus shifted to laying groundwork for sentencing, hoping to avoid a life sentence without parole. She continued to line up expert witnesses who could testify about Marcus's psychological state and his potential for rehabilitation, though she was increasingly doubtful about how effective this would be given her client's behavior. Morrison's biggest challenge remained Marcus himself. In their trial preparation sessions, she tried repeatedly to coach him on appropriate courtroom demeanor. She explained that jurors would be watching him throughout the trial, that his reactions would speak as loudly as any testimony. She instructed him to appear solemn, to avoid making eye contact with the victim's family, to show respect for the court. Marcus responded to these instructions with increasing hostility. He told Morrison she was being dramatic, that he wasn't going to put on an act for anyone. He insisted that the jury would see through any pretense of remorse and that he refused to be fake. Morrison tried to explain that this wasn't about being fake, it was about showing basic human decency and respect for the severity of the situation. But her words seemed to bounce off Marcus like rain off stone. The tension between Marcus and his family also reached a breaking point during this period. His father visited him regularly at the jail, but their conversations were strained and often ended in arguments. Thomas Brennan couldn't understand his son's coldness, his refusal to show any remorse for what he had done. Jennifer, Marcus's sister, visited less frequently, and her visits became increasingly emotional as she struggled to reconcile the brother she had tried to help with the monster he had become. During one particularly difficult visit, Jennifer broke down and asked Marcus how he could have done something so terrible to someone who had only tried to help their family. Marcus's response was chilling. He told her that Rachel Martinez had gotten what she deserved for interfering in their lives and that he was tired of everyone acting like she was a saint. Jennifer left that visit in tears, and Morrison worried about whether she would be able to testify on Marcus's behalf when the time came. The trial of the people of the state of California versus Marcus Brennan commenced on a Monday morning in early spring. The Jefferson County Courthouse was packed with spectators, including members of the media, concerned community members, and of course, Rachel Martinez's family. Security was heightened due to the high-profile nature of the case and the emotional intensity surrounding it. Marcus entered the courtroom wearing a suit that his attorney had provided, his hair neatly combed, looking superficially like any young man facing serious charges. But those who knew to look could see the subtle signs of his true nature.
The slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, the casual way he surveyed the courtroom as if he were attending a sporting event rather than his own murder trial. Jury selection had taken 3 days, with both sides carefully vetting potential jurors for biases. Patterson sought jurors who could handle the graphic evidence and who would respond to logical, fact-based arguments. Morrison looked for empathetic individuals who might be receptive to arguments about youth and potential for change. The final jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from 26 to 67, a cross-section of the community now tasked with judging one of their own. Judge Thompson called the court to order, and the trial officially began. She gave preliminary instructions to the jury, explaining their role, the burden of proof, and the seriousness of their duty. As she spoke, Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking around the room with undisguised curiosity, his attention everywhere except on the judge. James Patterson delivered his opening statement with controlled intensity. He began by painting a portrait of Rachel Martinez, not as a faceless victim, but as a living, breathing person who had made a difference in her community. He described her work as a social worker, her dedication to helping troubled families, her kindness to neighbors. He made her real to the jury, giving them a sense of the life that had been taken. Then Patterson's tone shifted. He methodically outlined the evidence the jury would see, the physical evidence placing Marcus at the scene, the murder weapon found in his possession, the security footage showing him before and after the crime, and most damaging of all, his own confession. Patterson described the crime itself in stark terms, not gratuitously, but factually,